Parang last book na ito ng Pentateuch.
Oo, tapos na. Okay, so nandito na tayo sa Deuteronomy. So alam natin ang Deuteronomy ay ito ay galing sa English title which came from Septuagint. Septuagint is the the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. It means a second law giving, actually, ang ibig sabihin ng Deuteronomy. Actually, it came from the mistranslation of 17:18, chapter 17, verse 18, which is not actually the Deuteronomy. Actually, is a copy of the law. It is not a second law giving, but rather it is a review, expansion, and iterations of the original law given at the Sinai. So the title of the book in Hebrew Bible, it has two words, Ele Hadibarim, which translate into English, these are the words, in verses 1 and chapter 1, verse 1. The ancient Near Eastern Zorinti treatise began the same way. So the Jewish title give a strong clue to the literary character of Deuteronomy. Ang sinasabi lang dito na nung panahon nito, may kasabay siya na isang treaty, no? Kasi ang Deuteronomy actually is like a treaty that Moses is telling to the Israelites. At yung treaty na yan ay, ako kung tama yung pronunciation, Zorinti treatise o Zorinti treatise. Nitong treatise na ito ay halos kapareho siya ng the book of Deuteronomy. Dahil dito, ito ay ang treatise na meron siyang preamble, no? With the historical prologue, the stipulation, the process and the readings of the covenant, the witnesses, curses, and blessing. That is how the treatise done at the time. At ito rin ang the book of Deuteronomy. Meron siyang preamble, historical, stipulation, the reading of the covenant, the Ten Commandments, the witnesses, the curses, and the blessings. So the writer Moses, actually, the book of Pentateuch is written by Moses. No? And Deuteronomy, it was written in the plain of Moab, shortly before his death, which occurred about 1406 BC. So the Mosaic authorship of this book is easy to establish. First, the claim to be the word of Moses, mababasa natin sa chapter 1, verse 5, 9, chapter 5, verse 1, chapter 27, verse 1, and so on and so forth. And some writing also. We can see the authorship of the Bible of Moses on the book of Deuteronomy. So other Old Testament also assert the Mosaic authorship of Deuteronomy, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 3, chapter 8, verse 53, 2 Kings. And even Jesus Christ believed that Moses wrote the Deuteronomy. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 7 to 8, Mark 10, and then John, even Apostle Peter, in Acts chapter 3, verse 22, Stephen, Acts chapter 7, Paul, Romans chapter 10, and the author of the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verse 28. So, Deuteronomy is like a book of Leviticus that both books consist of entirely of instruction and speeches. Actually, the book of Deuteronomy is not much of book of history as Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers. It is a book of law, actually. So it is actually 4 speeches of Moses. It's like Deuteronomy telling the instruction concerning the tabernacle, the furnitures, the worship. So they are the law in Leviticus. The law was given, or it is. But here in Deuteronomy, it is preached rather than revealed. While in Exodus, the letter and the holiness of the law is prominent, the spirit of the law is emphasized in Deuteronomy. So the book of Deuteronomy is a document prepared by Moses as witness to the dynastic covenant which the Lord gave to Israel in the plain of Moab. So the general theme of Deuteronomy can be comprehensively stated in a single sentence. It is a call to the service of one God by the elect people centered around one sanctuary through obedience to the law in the land which God has given. So, yun ang the general theme of the book of Deuteronomy. That there is one God, one elect people, which they are actually centered on the sanctuary. Sanctuary is where the presence of God can be found, and God expects them to obey the law of the land. So as we see, God is placing before his people the book of Deuteronomy, the conditions of their occupancy of this land of Canaan. And we shall see that these conditions sum themselves to one great word, obedience. So God gives them the land, but they need to obey God. So there are the verses, the word covenant, the key words. It's like the book of Leviticus. The key verses, chapter 4, verse 9, 22, 31, and chapter 10, verse 12 to 14, and chapter 30, verse 19 to 20. Then the key chapter is 27. In it, there is a formal ratification of Israel's covenant as Moses and the Levitical priests called upon all Israel to heed and listen. For in verses 9 to 10 it declared, "This day you have become people of God, a people for the Lord your God. You shall therefore obey the Lord your God and do his commandments and his statutes which I command you today. So it is a declaration that formally they are people of God. Chapter 28 and verse chapter 30 are also key chapters because of the promises regarding Israel near and distant future. And it is pertains to blessing for obedience and cursing for disobedience. Let me see that. Okay, so the key people, Moses and Joshua. Christ as seen in Deuteronomy. The statement made in Moses in chapter 18, verse 15 is one of the clearest portraits of Christ. It reads, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you. From your countrymen you shall listen to him." So it is a prophecy about the Lord Jesus Christ. Father Moses is a type of Christ, is the only figure other than Christ to fill all three of the offices of the prophet, the priest, and a king. Although Moses was not a king, he functioned as a ruler of Israel. So Moses and Christ they are like, no? They are Moses is the type of Christ because he is a prophet, he's a priest, and at the same time a king. So we have that. So this is the preamble. We said that this is the Deuteronomy, and it's like a treaty. There's a preamble, the historical. That is what God did. Actually, chapter 1 to 4, Moses narrate what God did to Israel. So chapter 5, verse 1 to chapter 12, verse 1, the stipulation, the 10 Commandments and the related commandments. And this is what Israel is to do. That is chapter 5 to chapter 12. And chapter 13 to 27, the blessings and the curse. And chapter 28 to 31, the taxation. What God will do. So, what God did already, what God did to them, what Israel is to do, and God what will do to them. Actually speaking to the new generation, the old generation that across, that leave Israel, Egypt, is no longer there. He's speaking to the sons of the people who walk away from Egypt, but they're trying to return there. The book of Deuteronomy, so the verses 1 to 4 of chapter 1, the identification of the mediator and the time and place of covenant renewal. The preamble to the renewed covenant. This is where the historical setting of Israel in the plain of Moab after wandering 40 years since their exodus from Egypt. So the word of Moses in verse 1, which the Lord had commanded Moses to speak to the people in Transjordan. They call that Transjordan. The cities that he mentioned in chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. No? They are from Sinai to Kadesh to Moab. No? They are now in the plain of Moab. So also the Moses mentioned about the fate of Sihon and Og. This occurred after the defeat of the king of Amorites. And Og is the king of Bashan. And so these are the prelude to the word which Moses speak to all Israel, or this is the speech. You can translate that as this is the speech that Moses speak. So he addressed at the place to address. It is 11 days journey from Horeb by the Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Horeb is another name of Mount Sinai. So the time of address, we can see that in verses 3 to 4. So wala pa laging kumpaan. So chapter 1, verse 6 to chapter 4, verse 43, this is Moses' first speech or address. Through a rehearsal of covenant history, Moses traces the Israel experience with the Lord from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. They are now in Kadesh Barnea, to their wilderness wandering after their taking of the land from Peor, so that they will remember the characters of the Lord and obey him as they prepare to enter the land. So these are just Moses rehearsing of what happened during their journey from Israel, from Egypt to the plain of Moab. So he just make a review of Israel history while they leave Egypt. And that is chapter 1 to 4. Actually, he's telling them, this is what God did to you. So this is Moses' review of Israel covenant history from Mount Sinai to the plain of Moab, which demonstrate Yahweh faithfulness to the covenant in spite of Israel's repeated unfaithfulness to it. So Moses from chapter 1, verses 5 to 46, he reviewed the Israel covenant from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, which demonstrate the faithfulness of God to the covenant in spite of Israel's defiance and refusal to enter the land and take the possessions of the land, actually. So number two, the review. He reviewed the Israel covenant history from Kadesh Barnea to Transjordan, which they, as we always repeated, demonstrate Yahweh faithfulness to the covenant. And he is now, rather for the sake of the new generation. He provided for all Israel needs for 40 years in the wilderness and brought his people safety to the plain of Noah. That is chapter 2. So that include also the review of Israel covenant history in the region of Transjordan that demonstrate Yahweh continued faithfulness by showing that he gave victory over Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, and gave Israel all their land, which was a portion to tribes of Reuben and Gad and half of the tribes of Manasseh as inheritance. This is part of the so-called Transjordan. So he telling them what happened to them or what God did to them in their journey from Egypt, now in the plain of Moab, which they are about to enter the promised land. Chapter 4, verses 1 to what? Chapter 4, verses 1 to 40 is the covenant history at Mount Sinai. He reviewed Israel entering into a covenant relationship with God in Mount Sinai. This is part of Moses' first address. So he called them to obedience in keeping the 10 Commandments. Then the chapter 4, verses 1 to 8, and 9 to 14, the historical constituting of Israel under covenant. Call to remember the day Israel agreed to the covenant at Horeb or Mount Sinai. So here Moses repeated what happened to Mount Sinai, the giving of the law, which means that God formally made them a covenant in Mount Sinai. So this is just a repetition of what happened in the previous three books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Number. So Moses narrate from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea to the plain of Moab. Here in this chapter 4, this is Moses recounts the nations making covenant with God. Include the warning to be careful to obey the first of the 10 Commandments. Now that is about worshiping Jehovah. So Israel's unique relationship with Yahweh as his chosen people to whom he revealed himself and of whom he demands covenant obedience. That is chapter 4, verses 32 to 40. That is how Moses reminded them the relationship with God. Then the last part of the speech of Moses is the appointment of the city of refuge, verses 41 to 43. So these are what Moses told them. So there is an okay. So now we go to the second address, speech of Moses, and this is chapter 4, verse 44 to chapter 26, verse 19. This is mahaba ito. No? So the sitting, chapter 4, 44 to 49. So again, this is a rehearsals of Israel covenant responsibilities. So chapter 1 to 4, what God did to them. Chapter 4, verse 44 to chapter 26, what they are to do. This is their responsibility, their covenant responsibility, with glimpse of national prophetic history. Moses proclaims obedience as means by which the Lord will bless the nation in the land. So there is a blessing when they obey God, and there is cursing when they disobey God. So this is how the covenant stipulation, blessings and cursing. And Moses emphasized the obedience of the people of God to their covenant God. So the sitting is given of Israel after Exodus, the wilderness wandering, the defeat of Simon and Og, the opposites of Ben-Hur, where Moses sits before them the law. Then the sitting is giving of Israel after Exodus. Then he give them the 10 Commandments. No? Yung letter A, actually this is before the giving of the law. Now then, letter B, he reminded them about the 10 Commandments. So after summoning all Israel, Moses exhorted them to hear the 10 Commandments, which they heard at Mount Horeb, and which led them in fear to have Moses act as a mediator between them and the Lord and the rest of the land. So here Moses reminded them that they are the one who convinced Moses to be their mediator. They asked Moses to be their mediator to God, so that they will be able to live. That is how Moses was. I'm telling you, you are the one who asking me to mediate you between God and you. So he summoned them and exhort them on what God tell them. So Moses is speaking to them of what happened in Mount Horeb. So the Ten Commandments, no, the small outline of this, the letter B. Moses summoned Israel and speak to them. Moses exhort the nation to hear the statutes and ordinances which were given to them in Horeb or Mount Sinai. Then again, in chapter 5, verses 6 to 51 or 21, Moses repeated the Ten Commandments to them. So you can hear that, for example, no God had to be placed before Yahweh or Elohim, or redeem Israel from Egypt, verse 6 to 7. No idols in chapter 8, verse 10. So, Elohim names is not to be taken in vain. The Sabbath day. Then honor your parents. Thou shalt not commit or be adultery. So on and so forth. He repeated that, the Ten Commandments. So Moses recount how the Israel, after hearing God speak the Ten Commandments, pleaded that Moses would mediate them to the Lord, so that they will not be destroyed by him. So the Lord agreed, dismissing the nation to their tents and keeping Moses to hear and teach the nation the law to observe the land. So that is what Moses reminded them in verses 22 to 33 in chapter 5. Okay, nandiyan pala yan. No? So letter C, the cursing, the blessings and the cursing. So Moses recounted the great commandment of full commitment to the Lord and warning of cursings and blessings to the nation. So they will be blessed in the land. That is chapter 6, verse 1 to chapter 11. So chapter 6, Shema for the blessings rather than judgment in the land. So the nation is to fully committed to Yahweh and to communicate their commitment to the next generation. So here in chapter 6, the commandment which Moses is about to give to the nation is so that and their generation might fear the Lord, so as to obey with the result of blessings. So this is what Moses is telling them. Then they need to obey God. So each person is to willfully commit himself to God with all of his heart, his soul, and his ability. His motive, actually, This is hard. So the part of this chapter 6, verses 5 to 6, that they need to commit themselves to God with all their heart, with all their soul, and with all their strength. And that is their motive, their person, and their ability. And so here also in chapter 6, particularly verse 7 and 9, Moses commanded them to love God. You see, the loving God is also part of the covenant relationship between Israel and God. And then he gave them the warning of judgments of God if they will follow other gods in the land. And God will bless them if they will continue to obey God. So makikita natin yung blessings and cursings. If you worship other God, there will be a curse. And if you obey God, there will be blessings. Chapter 13 to 19 of chapter 6. So chapter 7, Moses reminds them of the destructions of nations. Israel as a people religiously separated unto Yahweh. So here he reminds them that they are separated. They are a unique nation of God compared to other nations around them. That is chapter 7. So here is a command here that Israel is to destroy with the power of the Lord the nations in the land without contaminating herself with them, so that she will not also experience the judgments of God upon her, that blessing. So chapter 7 is a command that they need to conquer the land and destroy everything, the people there. But of course, history will tell us that they did not fully destroy all these people. They actually lived together. That's why there is a problem there. Marriage with, or we call that mixed marriage with the natives of that land and the people of Israel. So Israel is to keep the commandments which Moses proclaimed to them, keeping the Abrahamic covenant with them, and the need to destroy their enemies. So actually, Israel become rather the nation around them, they are fearful of Israel. So they are, Moses reminding them the powers of deliverance which the Lord worked for them in Egypt. And because of this, the nations around them, they are fearful with Israel. Because Egypt at the time is very powerful nation, but they are able to escape Egypt. And people perceive that they are strong. And Moses reminded them in verses number 3. So the awareness of Yahweh as providers. Yahweh make them victorious in anything that they face the war along the way to Canaan. So Israel is to enter the land with an awareness from their own history. That is the Lord alone who has graciously and abundantly provided for them in their evil to this point, and thus will bless them in the land if they obey, and curse them if they disobey. So here Moses actually is trying to tell them that despite the fact that you are rebellious to God, God is faithful to his covenant with you. The reason why you survive because of the faithfulness of God to the covenant. And that is give them a warning. They will perish if, like other nations, if they will disobey God. So this is the awareness of what God did to them. Remember, as the Lord goes before them to defeat nations, that they had victory. It is because of the covenant of God to Abraham. That is part of chapter 9. Let me see that I put it here. No? Yes, no, so these are the exhortations to remember Yahweh, covenants, faithfulness. Exhortation to remember it was Yahweh who provided Israel 40 years in the wilderness, chapter 8, verse 1 to 6. Chapter 8, verse 7 to 17, it is an exhortation to remember in time of prosperity, it was Yahweh who gave it to them, who gave Israel the blessings of good land and the abundance of water, food, housing, and herbs. Verses 18 to 20, exhortation to remember Yahweh, covenant. Faithfulness is, Yahweh is the one who blessed Israel, who confirms covenant with the patriarch. So those blessings are to confirm that God continue to show his faithfulness to Abrahamic covenant. So verses chapter 9 to chapter 10, verse 11, exhortation to remember Israel's unfaithfulness to the covenant. So Moses told them, remember your unfaithfulness to the covenant at Horeb, when they rebel against Yahweh by worshiping the golden calf. Chapter 9, verse 7 to 21. And next chapter, verse 22, exhortation to remember Israel's unfaithfulness to the covenant at Tabera and Kerub, Patava, where they provoked Yahweh to anger. So, The letter C, the covenant, a call to covenant faithfulness after reminding them of what they did to God, to Yahweh. Their unfaithfulness to Yahweh, Moses called them to covenant faithfulness through wholehearted obedience to the covenant stipulations. That is chapter 10 to chapter 11. So Moses told them the requirements of allegiance to Yahweh. And what are the requirements? Fear, love, and obey him. Or choose Israel for fathers, and them as well to set his affections on them, to love them. Verses 12 to 22. No? So again, we can see here that God is telling them that all of this evil and 40 years of wandering, it is for the purpose that they need to love God and also to possess the land that he promised to Moses. So the exhortation is obedience to God. And that allegiance to the covenant is to fear. Fear is the beginning of the knowledge. And love and obedience to him. That is chapter 10. No? Chapter 12 to chapter 26. These are the specific laws of covenant and prophetic history. The specific laws of the covenant, glimpses of the prophetic history are expounded so that Israel will obey and be blessed in the land, the land of Canaan. So marami ito, no? Hindi ko na sinulat yata dito. No? Sinulat yung iba. Worship. These are the specific laws of worship. So after Israel possessed the land and destroy all the pagan places of false worship, she must not assimilate their behavior or follow their example, but offer all sacrifices made for home. Also use exclusive worship at the center place, which the Lord will proclaim in order to receive blessings in the land. So here in chapter 12, you will see that Israel, when they enter the land of promise, they should completely destroy the worship place of the people there, chapter 1 to 3. So they need to practice worship in a central location. That is chapter 4, chapter 12, verses 4 to 14. And so the God are always telling them that they worship in one place, and also they need to have tithing, offering from the harvest of the Lord. That is in verses 15 to 27. Chapter 13 is it talks about the false teachers. if anyone, a prophet, relatives, or intercity, attempts to lead the nations away from the Lord to other gods, they must be resisted and destroyed in order to turn away Yahweh angers and to continue to receive blessings from him. So if there is a prophet to perform signs or wonders and attempt to lead anyone from the Lord to other God, they will be destroyed. Verses 1 to 5. So any relatives or friends entice anyone to leave the Lord will be destroyed. They call that unmercifully killed. If the entire city began to lead Israel or the people away from the Lord, the entire city is to be destroyed. That is in verses 12 to 18. So chapter 14 is talk about the separation of Israel. Israel is to demonstrate a separation to the Lord from other nations of the land. So they are the holy nations of God. And how they mourn for the dead and how they even eat their food. That is in chapter 14. So Moses telling them that you are separated by God from other nations. So you need to practice mourning ritual for the dead. So you need to eat a type of animal, fish, and birds. And that is part of how they were separated. So not here the God declared the so-called unclean food that they need to eat. That is in verses 3 to 21. This is how you will be separated. The way of life is also how you physically actually obey God on what you need to eat. So in chapter 14 also speak about the tithing. So Israel to tithe, that is the 10%, physically or monetarily to the Lord, all of the product, what they produce, which come out of the field every year in a celebration before the Lord in the place where he will establish his name, except for every third year where it go to the Levite in his town. So remembering that he has no other portions among the nation in order to receive blessing from the Lord. So he's telling them that they need to support the priest as we support our preachers. So it's part of on the third year, all the tithes will be given to the Levites. Then he talks about the Sabbath in chapter 15. So this is the celebrations of the Sabbath at the end of 7th year. Is to be a time when anyone in Israel is to grant remissions of all this to her own people who will willfully and graciously help in their needs, because the Lord has blessed the nation and will continue to do so if they will obey. So these are, may utang ka sa panahon nito, at the end of 7 years, every 7 years, you are free sa lahat na utang mo. No? So then there is a need to obey the Lord. So that they will not become poor and have obligation to other nations. If one in the nation comes upon a poor brothers in need, and even if it is near the 7 years, one is willing and generously lend to other people or part of those poor, the poor people of Israel. So they need to take care with them. And also speak about the kinsmen, a Hebrew man or woman that is sold in slavery. And in the 7 years, they will be free. In part of chapter 15, the consecrations of the firstborn male. All the firstborn males of the herds and flocks are to be consecrated, separated from work, and then sacrificed in a family meal before the Lord in the place which he chooses, except for those which have defect. So these are the separations of the flock, of animals that need to be part of the sacrifice to the Lord. They always emphasize the place which he chooses. They are still traveling at this time. The tabernacle is traveling them. It is always in the mind of God that they have one place to worship, and where the tabernacle will build. And later on, the temple will build. Then chapter 16 is about the feast of Israel, the Passover, the weeks, the booths. So 3 times a year of all Israel male are to appear before the Lord in the place which he chooses, to celebrate the feasts of the unleavened bread, the feast of the week, the feast of the booths, and with sacrifices the Lord has blessed. So again, the emphasis, they are still outside the promised land. So God will tell them where to build the tabernacle. So we know the Passover, and that is the celebrations of what happened in Egypt. The Feast of the Week, the 7 days after the gathering from the wine and threshing floor, meaning the harvest they need to celebrate the booths for 7 days in the place which God chose them. So verses 13, the last part of chapter 16 is a summary that 3 times a year of all Israel male will appear to God. Chapter 16 to 17 is the appointing of judges. So Israel to appoint judge for herself in its town, which the Lord has given to judge uprightly all offenses of the people, or to take offense beyond their ability to the place of the Lord, where the matter will be decided with the Levites or judges appointed there to be executed exclusively by the local judge in order to purge all evil from the land, so that the Lord will bless the land. So there is always a leader in one town, and they call that judge. There's also a stipulation in chapter 17, appointing a king. So when Israel entered the land, they decided to appoint a king. He is to be one of the Lord's choose from their countrymen, who is not to multiply houses, wives, or gold and silver to himself, no. And is to copy, read, and obey the law of the Lord. So this is the king that they need to be, no. They should not choose a king that is just who love gold and silver and will have wives, so many wives. Of course, what happened is every king that they have a lot of wives, you know, like Solomon. But the work of the king is to copy, read, and obey the law of the Lord. So this is the emphasis of obeying the Lord. By obeying the Lord means that we need to study the Word of God. So chapter 18, the provision against spiritual practices of the nation. So when Israel entered into the land, the Lord does not permit them to imitate the detestable spiritual practices of the nation. In other words, those people living there, they should not practice child sacrifice, divination, witchcraft, interpreting omen or sorcery, casting spells, or acting as a medium or spiritualist by calling up the dead. No? And that is what happened to us today. No? We have that medium calling the dead. No? Then chapter 18, verses 15 to 19, this is the prophecy concerning the Lord Jesus Christ, a prophet like Moses. The Lord will raise up a prophet like Moses to speak as the mediator between the people and the Lord, as the people requested Moses, and bringing judgment from the Lord upon all of those who does not listen to them. This is actually speaking to Jesus Christ. And chapter 18 also is part of the test of the prophet. So any prophet who speak for another God, or who says that he speak for the Lord, but is proven to be false, since his words does not come true, is to be killed by the prophet. Meaning there is someone, if a certain person prophesying for the future will not happen, he shall be killed. Then chapter 19, verse 14, moving neighbor's boundary. Israel is not to move his neighbor boundary mark from where the ancestor placed it, to mark off the inheritance of the Lord. So there is a division from the land. So other tribes could not remove that mark and settle there. It is given to a certain tribe. They should observe it, or rather respect that mark. So most of the we found in chapter 18 is actually the prohibition. They are prohibited the practices, spiritual practices of the nation as we enumerated. Chapter 19 is also include the city of refuge. Chapter 20 Moses remind them Yahweh as their protector. Actually, we have a lot of discussion here in chapter 18 and 19 now. So when Israel comes to battle against powerful enemies, they are to realize that it is the Lord who is fighting for them. This is very important reminder to them because when they entered the land, there were a lot of war. And they are reminded that they are not alone. God is fighting with them. So send home those who have unfinished beginnings in the land, and to either wage a measure attack on distant cities or unmeasured destructions on those people near to them. In other words, they need to destroy all the people in the promised land that dwells in that land. So when they fight, they need to remember that this is actually encouragement, that they should not be afraid or panic because the Lord is with them. He is fighting for them against their enemy. So when Israel is approaching the enemy, they need to remember that it is God who is fighting them. So when Israel come to the city that is far from them, they are to offer peace and place the people into forced labor if they accept them. If they refuse, God will give it to God will fight them and destroy them. And He will strike all the men down. Take the women, children, and the spoil or booty. So that is the command of God to them. Offer them peace, let them go. If they will perceive, kill them, especially the men. And He will make the women and children as slaves. That is in chapter 20. So chapter 21, the undetected homicide. In the case of the undetected homicide in the open country, the elders of the nearest city had to make atonement by breaking the neck of the heifer and then confessing their innocence before the priest about the dead heifer, whereupon God will remove the blood of guiltiness upon the people. Homicide, merong namatay, no? At hindi malaman kung sinong nakapatay, no? Or maybe accident. So they need to offer. So this is actually, let me see that. A law concerning community life in the land was given. So this is how you will do, no? The burials of the criminals. So a man hang on a tree for a sin worthy of death, to be buried before the evening of the same day. And that is what happened actually to Jesus Christ. And the two others thieves beside the Lord Jesus Christ, they were buried on the same day. And also how the responsibility towards neighbor Israel are responsible for the care for the possession, like the sheep of their countrymen, so as to return or restore them to a countryman as soon as possible. And that is how responsibility towards neighbor. Dress also, they have a dress code. It is abomination to the law for a man or woman to dress as an opposite sex. So a woman who dress like a man and a man who dress like a woman, it is a sin to God. Then animal life, it does include if a person can found a bird's nest with the mother sitting on the young, it is only permissible to take the young, but not the mother. So, kung kakainin mo yung, kukunin mo yung ibon, hindi mo pwedeng kunin yung nanay. No? That's the principle. Kaya dami pa yung nanay. No? Yung anak ng nanay niya. Yung anak, pwede mong kunin. Yung father, the mother could not be. No? The building could also be part of that. So whoever build a house need to build a whole wall about the roof to keep anyone from feeling so that you will not be guilty of blood of someone's death. So meron silang building code, ano? Purity rather than mixtures in all life. So no one is to mix seed in a vineyard, animal or flower or materials together in clothing. Then the men who rape women, children with stepmothers, not to. So there are a lot of, you need to read that chapter 21 to 22. No? A community life. No? When you are charging if a man charging his wife with not, when that he is not virgin at their marriage, the parent has the opportunity to defend their child with the garment of truth. So if the man is wrong, he must be whipped by the elders. He need to pay the fathers, the family, silvers, and remain with his wife. If he is right that his wife is not virgin, when he get married, the woman should be stoned to death. That's the reason why when Mary gave birth to Jesus, and Joseph learned that he has a child, to avoid being killed, he need to marry Mary. Chapter 23, life concerning congregational life. So, whom to allow into the assembly, what to do with bodily function, on how to deal with runaway slaves and how to seek for from pagan gods. These are worshiping and relationship within the congregation. Chapter 23:19 to 25, the law concerning the weak or the vulnerable are given. Charging interest, for example, vow, eating with angry, divorce, marriage, taking place, kidnapping, kidnappers, leprosy, and so on and so forth. Lahat yan. Tungkol ito sa mga mahihina, pinautang mo, at pinautang mo siya ng malaking tubo. That is the life that you need to follow. So you need to function so the charging of interest are part of that now. You cannot charge interest to the people of God or vow. So you need only to vow to God. No other vow to other God. Eating when hungry, when passed through a neighbor's vineyard or field, he may take what he can eat, but he may not take any more. So meron siyang provision kung gaano lang karaming kakainin niya. Also divorce and obligation for newly married. Dito, pag bagong kasal ka, hindi ka pwedeng pumunta sa gera. You need to leave to fulfill your duty to your wife. So kidnapper, if a man kidnap any of his countrymen from Israel and hurt or sell him, he is to put to death. This is very important, kasi may mga tao na kinukuha yung mga bata, yung mga babae at binibenta sa slavery at the time. Okay, so when it is the offering of the first fruit when entering the land. So when Israel entered the land, they have to offer the first fruit to the Lord at the place where he chose, meaning to the tabernacle. Declaring the Lord's faithfulness to him, and on the third year, he is to give it to the Levite, the strangers, orphan, and the strangers in his city, asking for the Lord's blessing in obedience. So chapter 26, actually a summary, charging the Lord's command Israel to do all the statutes and ordinances given with all their heart and soul, since their covenant relationship with God, so that in their obedience he may exalt them as people separated unto him. So that is chapter 26, 16 to 19. The summary of what Moses told them. The third address, this is the covenant renewal. Through a covenant renewal with the nation on the plain of Moab, Moses proclaimed the blessings and cursing which came upon the nation. Chapter 27 to chapter 30. To keep the commandments of the Lord. That's part of the third address. Then the blessings and cursing. The Lord promised to their blessed or curse Israel in the land, according to whether or not she follow God in diligent obedience. Blessings if they follow God, cursing if you disobey God. And also the renewal, covenant renewal. Moses renewed the covenant with Moses at Moab by renewing historical relationship with the Lord, presenting it before those present and the future generation, telling of the future time when Israel will remember this covenant and to restore its blessing, reminding them that his word and reachable so they might obey the Lord, and reminding them that this obedience will bring about judgment from the Lord, so they should choose obedience and life. That is chapter 29 to 30. The fourth address is chapter 31 to chapter 33, verse 29. This is the final charge. In the final words of Moses, he charged the nation to take the land. Remember that they are about to enter the land. So they need to take the land, read the law, know that his word will be a witness against them beside the Ark of the Covenant. Listen to the prophetic history to know that they will need to be obedient to the blessing and blesses that the nation will respect to the land tribe by tribe. So the final address is Moses summarized the need to take the law, the land, read the law, and keep obedience to God. So they are now ready to enter the land, but they need to be charged by Moses. Moses will not be able to enter the land. That's why he gave them 4 speeches of what they need to do. After telling them that what God did to them, Moses gave them the charge that they need to destroy and take the land. Destroy, actually, the people there. So when you enter the land, do not fear. Enter the land with the law. Moses recounting of the final charge, encouraging the nation, and Joshua not to fear. He gave the completed law to read. The nation 8 years. So to the life of Israelites, the law of Moses is very important. It is very important to them to honor the covenant that they make in Mount Horeb. So there is a part of chapter 31 is the exhortation to take the land. Then part of that is the giving of the law to the priests. Then they sing the song of Moses. Then they take the law, the Ark of Covenant as the witness. So when Moses finished writing the law, it was placed by the Levite next to the Ark of Covenant as a witness against the nation. Whereupon Moses assembled the elders and officers to speak to because he knew that there will be a future rebellion against God. Chapter 31, verses 24 to 37. So chapter 31 to chapter 32 actually is about exhortations of the future, in the future, reminding them obedience will cause blessing, and disobedience or rebellion against God will cause judgment from God. So that I do not fear. It will be according to obedience in view of the future. I only read that. Blessing to the people. Chapter 32 to chapter 33. So before Moses goes to Mount Nebo, because he will remain there as the people of God continue to the land of the promised land. He went there to see the land which he may not enter due to his sin, and then to be gathered to his people in death. He prophetically blessed the nation tribe by tribe. So he gave them, so Mount Nebo, the Lord told Moses to go to Mount Nebo to see the land of Canaan, and then died there. Then part of chapter 33 is the blessings of Moses. So before his death, the death of Moses, Moses blessed the son of Israel. Tribe by tribe. Then chapter 34, this is the sitting confirming. This is the transfer of the leadership from Moses to Joshua. As the last day of Moses came is shown, the land from Mount Nebo where the Lord died and was buried in the plain of Moab, according to the land of the word of the Lord. Mourned over by Israel, replaced in leadership by Joshua, but not replaced the Israel as the supreme prophet before God. So that is how the last chapter. And this is a problem here, because how can Moses write the last chapter when he already died? That is how this is. Well, it is not inspired. The book of Deuteronomy. Some don't like to accept the book because of that. How can Moses write his death when he's already died? And so, anyway, chapter 34, verse 9 reminds us that Joshua replaced Moses. He was filled with the spirit of wisdom as the one commissioned by Moses. And the nation listened and did as commanded, as they had with Moses. So waiting the prophet like Moses, so they are waiting for the New Testament. So no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, and Moses whom the Lord. So this is the replacement. That's why I just put there. So Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom. So the death of Moses, the last day of Moses, was recounting, including his journey at Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, where the Lord showed him all the land which have not allowed him to enter. So nakita niya yung land, no? That he was not able to enter. His death, according to the words of the law of the Lord, his burial in the valley of Moab, and the weeping of the nation for 30 days. So here it mentioned the replacement of Moses. Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom as one commissioned by Moses, a nation lesson, did as he commanded, as they had with Moses. So they are waiting for the prophet like Moses. So the death of Moses in chapter 34, the last of Moses, we have that already. Okay. We are done in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay, so you need to read the whole book so that you will actually appreciate. Siguro boring magbasa, no? Dahil it is just a reminder of what God did to them and what they should do to God. And the last is what God will do to them. So he said, do not fear, because God is with you when you enter the city or when you enter the promised land. Remember the spies. It always reminds them that people there are giants. They need to be reminded that God is with them. God is fighting with them. So any question